years ago.
Back to the mill. You were telling me, right?
Yes, well, it was started. My grandfather was living at Hatton Hall and renting the mill farm at Tutbury, and the Depression came on and he went out of farming. He decided to pack up farming. It wasn't profitable and he wasn't particularly well. In fact, he dropped down dead on a bus when he was 56. Overweight, overeaten, and anyway, he came to Orme was he packed up farming, bought a house down Wellfield Road, and came to the village. And Father came out of the First World War. He'd been commissioned into the Welsh Guards. He joined the Honourable Artillery Company and then commissioned out of that into the Welsh Guards. And he was having a drink at the Paul Pry Hotel, which is long since gone, with his brother-in-law, who was a chap called Wilfred Giroux, who was a bit of a scamp actually, but anyway, he married my father's sister. And he knew Wilfred Giroux through her. And Wilfred had a brother called Frank Giroux, and these three young men were having a drink at the Paul Pry Hotel when they heard that the mill was for rent. And at that time, Father was going to join the Rhodesian police. He was out of work, there was no farm. He said the only thing he knew anything about was farming. And like a lot of ex-army officers after the First World War, he was going to join the Rhodesian police. A lot of them did go out there, I believe, and of course his mother didn't want him to go because travel wasn't as good in those days, and once you went out there you never saw him again for years and years anyway. And these three men heard it was for rent, thought they'd have a go. And it belonged to Lord Lichfield. The whole premises belonged to Lord Lichfield, and the bottom yard at the mill was the estate timber yard for the Lady Margaret estate, which consisted of several farms round here and right down to Witchner, not Witchner, what's called Orgreave, down there. Malabar's farm used to be on the estate, both Manor Farm and the one in the middle of the village, and Mellors and all these other farms down there, down where Kirklands are, you know, down that lane there. There's two farms down there, and hills at Orgreave. They were all owned by Lord Lichfield on a separate estate called, I believe, called the Lady Margaret Estate, and they eventually sold it and the farmers were given the option to buy their own farms if they could, just sitting tenants. But and there was of course a manor at Orme years back, as you've seen in the records, which is long since gone by Kent's Bridge, and that was on the Salters Way, wasn't it, on the right through to where they crossed the river to get to Witchner. And but anyway, the mill came up for letting. A chap called Watson had rented it off Lord Lichfield and gone bust and done a moonlight flit. And subsequently to him going, Stubbs of Stone, who were corn merchants in Stone, rented it, I think, for just over a year or so, but not long anyway. I couldn't tell exactly how long they'd had it. But they had a traveller in the area going round farms, and they rented the mill and decided it wasn't profitable and gave up the tenancy. They gave up the tenancy. They kept the traveller in the area. Traveller did it all from Stone and got rid of the mill, if you like. And these three men decided to try and rent it, and hence that. And they had a go. Well, after 12 months, Wilfred Giroux, who was married to my father's sister, decided he was a bit older than the other two, and he was already in business as a coal merchant in Derby. And they decided that the business wasn't big enough for three of them. £100 profit in a year put them off, I suppose. You divide it by three, it isn't much, is it? And even in those days. And Wilfred drew out. He decided it wasn't big enough for three of them. Good job he did, actually. And Frank and my father carried on, if you like, and eventually it prospered. But I always feel a bit sorry for my father in a way, because everything he ever did was on borrowed money, if you like, and then he set up both his brothers, both Raymond and Stanley. My father godfathered. His father died young, as I say, and he was the eldest, and it was your job sort of thing in those days. Raymond went to work at Truman's. Father got him a job at Truman's at the brewery there. They didn't like it, and eventually he didn't become a director of the mill in those days, but he came into the mill and found a job. And then Stanley, his other brother, he put him in a coal business in Uttoxeter called the Brisbane Coal Company, because they factored coal. In those days, there was no living for a coal merchant in the summer. Farmers fed cattle in the winter, and some of them turned them out to grass, and there wasn't much to sell them, if you like. You did a bit of hay and straw carting when we had lorries, but there wasn't much. There were no compound cakes or compound fertilisers in those days. And what you did is you carted coal to farmers to stock them up for the winter. Yeah,
So you talk about no lorries. So what was the mode of transport for your father when he took over the mill?
Horse and cart. I think there were three employees. There was Ted Walker, who did the grinding. There was Frank Fox, who took a horse and cart and delivered it to local farmers just in the immediate locality. And these three blokes, in 1923, were very modern, decided to have a lorry. And they bought a Foden lorry which had a 3-ton capacity and solid tyres. And you didn't need a licence. They had an hour's instruction with a chap from Horse and Cart, Frank Fox, had to drive a lorry. They showed him how in the yard, and he went from Horse and Cart. They sold the horse, you see, and bought a lorry. And travelled a bit further. But in those days, the station was working in the village here. Father didn't have a car in those days. They used to go to Lichfield Market on a Tuesday, they go to Uttoxeter Market on a Wednesday, they go to Derby Market on a Friday, and try and sell to farmers, if you like. And one of them would go to either Manchester Corn Exchange or London Corn Exchange on the train and buy something. So one of you went up there and bought, I don't know, groundnut, soy or whatever, oil cake or something to feed to farmers, and you phoned the other one up at the market and told him what you'd bought, and he had to try and sell it. And in those days it was factored. We had one girl in the office called Miss Fiddler, who was only a young girl at the time. Miss Twist, as the farmers used to call her, and just to aggravate her, but she loved it really. She was a character. She could have but run the mill on her own, but she was very good, Miss Fiddler was. But she would factor it to the station. You would go to market, you would say have a load of, I don't know, cotton cake or oil cake like that, and it came in truckloads, and you'd sell half a truck to one bloke and half to another, and they had to fetch it from the station with a horse and cart. The old story, you hadn't sold anything. You'd go to market and you'd collar somebody and say, I've just got half a load left on a lorry, on a truck in your station, sort of thing, can I sell it to you? And like that. And if you sold that, then you, having sold half the truck, you went round and found somebody else to take the other half, if you like. And did it for incredibly little money. and the farmers used to pay you about twice a year. You could do it without a lot of credit, you see. The farmer would pay at the fat stock show in the winter and the summer show in the summer. And the reason for the summer shows wasn't as it is now, a village carnival or something. It was where you met the customer to sell him something for 6 months ahead, and he'd pay you for the last 6 months. People would buy fertiliser one year and pay you next year. You go there to sell him some more the succeeding year, and he'd pay you for last year in order for the next year, if you like.
And I seem to remember you've got some photographs of a trade stand that you used to have, haven't you? Is that right?
Yes, I have somewhere. Haven't you had those?
I don't think so. No.
Haven't
Sue has sent me 4 photographs that you gave her, but
I can probably find them.
yeah, there's no hurry. It was quite a big deal, wasn't it?
Well, they were really good. The Orme show was a good show. It's not a piffling thing that, I'm being derogatory, which isn't meant in that sense, but it was a real good show. It was almost as difficult to win a prize at Orme shows as it will be at some of the big ones. And it's like showers. Shower horses started virtually in Derbyshire. And the big show was at Peterborough. Peterborough there, the biggest shower show in the country. And shower horses were the best workhorses on farms ever. There were Clydesdales, which obviously came from up there and up north, but they were different. A shower, they were war horses originally, but the showers were more powerful and more bone and stronger animals, but they had feathered legs. They had a lot of hair around the legs, which was a bit of a problem because you've got what they call a greasy leg. If you overfed them, you had trouble with their feet. And of course, years later, the Clydesdale was a lighter horse. It wasn't as strong an animal, but it had a clean leg. So what did they do? They all cheated, if you like. The Shire people bought a Clydesdale to crossbreed with the Shire to get a cleaner leg, and the Shire people did the opposite. They wanted more bone and a bigger horse, if you like, and they'd cross it the other way, if you like, and then they'd kid everybody they were purebred, if you like, but they were crossbred, really, and that's how breeding went on with all animals, didn't it?
Yeah. Of course.
You started to try and improve the faults on
the best of the both worlds.
On your present breed. It all got some fault with it, but
so how did things progress from when the mill started to having your fleet of lorries and all the deliveries?
Well, they started in business like that, and of course it was a precarious business with, let's say, farming was depressed. It wasn't a very profitable industry to be selling to, just as it is now, really. And a lot of people went out of farming. The local landlords had a job to set the farms. Witchner farm, Witchner Bridges there, was the worst farm on Harrison's estate, on Witchner estate. They could never keep a tenant on it. Shukers used to farm it, used to be down the village here. Margaret Shuker, Margaret Stanhope, if you like, her relations. They farmed there, and what's his name? Chap committed suicide. Mercer followed, and his brother farmed it for a time, couldn't make a living on it, and went out to Kenya. Went joined the agricultural business for the government in Kenya, and Alec followed him. Alec followed his brother onto that farm. It was the worst farm on the estate. It had every sin known to man. It had a main road going through it. It had a river going through it. It had a canal going through it, and it had a train going through it. And it burnt in the summer. It's gravel. It burnt in the summer. It flooded in the winter. You couldn't drive cattle across the main road to get to the other side, and when it flooded, it silted the pastures. So if you turned cattle onto store cattle onto the flooded meadows, they got silt, and they got worms and things from the marshy land, if you like that, and liver fluke. You got liver fluke, and you had to leave it so long till the grass was clean before you could graze it, if you like. And it was a terrible farm, and of course luck was with Alec actually. When Alec took over from his brother, they farmed at Harleston originally. They had a good farm at Harleston, but these two men, Frank Giroux and my father, carried on in business all during the Second World War, and which was a little sad in a way, because I don't know whether you've heard of it, but there was such a thing during the war as an excess profits tax, and that was on all businesses to pay for the war, if you like. And you had a sort of datum that was based on the 3 previous years of profit that you made in the 3 previous years, if you like, and you were allowed to make up to that, and anything over that went as excess profits tax for the war effort, if you like. Now, if you were an established business that had been there for years, you got a pretty good datum, if you like. But if you were a young business in its infancy and just getting on your feet, and you weren't allowed to plough. If your business was improving, if you like, you weren't allowed to plough it back into the business, if you like. You couldn't do anything with it. It all went to the war effort, if you like. You were allowed to make what you'd made the previous 3 years, but if you hadn't made much, yes, anything over that, however well you were doing, went to the government, if you like, virtually to pay for the war, which was hard cheese, if you like. So the business would have, well, been a lot better, if you like, if you'd been allowed to plough it back into the business and do more bigger buildings or put a new compound plant in or whatever. You weren't allowed to do it till the war finished, if you like. And so it rather restricted their progress. You were at a dead stop, if you like. You were allowed to do what you'd done before the war, but not to get any better. But during the war, all they wanted was production, wasn't it? Virtually. And during that time, my father became the vice president for 2 years and the president of the National Association of Corn and Agricultural Merchants. And he spent a lot of his time in London with the Ministry of Food, allocating bomb-damaged warehouses. If there was human food there that was condemned for human consumption because of bomb damage, you had to go and assess its value for salvage, if you like, for animal feed. Now, during the war, every farmer, because food had to be imported into this country, they wanted production. And all the things you fed cattle, pigs and poultry on was rationed. And you had coupons. When I first went round, my biggest job was to collect the coupons. If you could persuade the farmer, you had red ones for protein, you had blue ones for cereal, you had green ones for calves and things like that. And you were allocated according to the number of stock you got and so forth by the Ministry of Food. And the farmer used to get these coupons.
In simple terms, what at that point was the mill producing?
Oh, God knows, I couldn't tell you its actual tonnage. But
no, actually, not in terms of tonnage, but what was it actually making? Just so people can...
It virtually made pig and well. When Father started, there weren't any such things as compound feeds, and there weren't any such things as compound fertilisers. if you wanted to fertilise your land, you've heard of marl pits on farms. The farmer used to put fallow land. He used to stop having a crop on it to give it a rest, if you like, and they used to dig clay out of marl pits and spread it on the land to improve its fertility. And then you lime it every so many years to stop it being acid, if you like, and to clean it. And you'd also put basic slag on it on meadows, which was a very sensible thing to do. I wish we'd still got it. Basic slag it was full of phosphate, and it had a lot of trace elements in it. It was a byproduct of the steel industry from the old Bessemer steel furnaces, which no longer exist. They do it a different way today. But in those days, they produced basic slag as a byproduct, which we sold to farmers to spread on the land, and it had trace elements like boron and manganese and magnesium and iron, of course, ferrous and so forth, and this put back trace elements into the land, and it improved the pastures, if you like. You had to slag it, but you had to keep the cattle off it to wash it clean, if you like.
So what was the range of products that you made
well,
in the mill?
That went on, and eventually farmers used to feed oil cakes to cattle, like cotton cake, groundnut, soya, and of course maize that they used to import from America and so forth. And we used to factor those to farmers, and you used to buy oil cakes in curves. They were they were the byproduct of the human oil trade, if you like. You got palm oil, you got groundnut oil, you got linseed oil, and things like that. You buy it in these, and you'd press the oil out of it with presses. Now, they didn't know how to do it with chemicals as they do today, if you like. It was all pressed out. Well, you could only press it so far. You'd press it into great big curves with the weight of the presses, and you got so much oil out, but there'd always be a residue. There'd be, I don't know, 2%, 4% or oil left in the cake, and you used to deliver these to farmers, and every farmer got what they call a cake breaker. It was a thing you turned by hand, or eventually people got modern and put an electric motor on it or something, and it smashed the curves up into small pieces for them to mix in the chop house, as they used to call it, mix with bran and maize and other feeds to make a ration for the cows, if you like. Then, of course, all that oil came in at the ports. It was straight off the boats, if you like. This was, and they got the idea that they would use the maize that was imported, use the wheat and stuff that was surplus to flour, and oats and barley, and make a compound cake. So eventually it was cheaper to do that at the port than it was inland. Virtually they started making compound cakes, businesses like Rank Hovis, Bibby's, Levers at Port Sunlight and Silcox and people like that. They were all port mills, and they all made compound cakes for farmers.
So did that affect the business here?
Well, yes and no. We didn't do any. Eventually, we used to make pig and poultry rations from local grain, if you like, in the area, plus a certain amount of soya or thing that we imported from the port. But we used to take, the mill is peculiarly well situated. On one side of the mill, you go towards Uttoxeter or Derby. On that side, it's nearly all stock. It's heavy clay land, more suitable for stock than it is for arable. On this side of the mill, you've got Lichfield, Atherstone, which is all lighter land, if you like, and it was more suitable for arable. And also, if you go round on the other side of Derbyshire, around Melbourne and Ticknall and Leicester side, that was largely arable, and the other was largely stock. Uttoxeter was the second biggest stock market in the Midlands, next to Banbury, and sadly both have now gone, which is terribly sad. And but you could buy grain on that side of the mill, if you like, and you could compound it and mix it and sell it on that side of the mill. It was short haulage.
So eventually, going from having the one lorry, how many lorries were there?
Oh well, we ended up with about 6, 8 ton of commas, and we'd have about 4 15-ton Fodens. Father always loved Fodens. His first lorry was a Foden, and he was Foden minded. It was his pride and joy. And so you had Fodens for long distance haulage, if you like, and we used to take, you can't believe it now, 2 1/4 hundredweight bags of grain up to Birkenhead Mill in Liverpool, or to Manchester, to Trafford Mills in Manchester, and or to Avonmouth, like that. You take the grain up and you come back with a load of cattle cake as a backload. Like you go to Birkenhead Mill, you deliver the grain into their silo and you'd load up their compound cake for a backload.
There was a story you told, Sue, about somebody, what was his name, he used to go, was it to Birkenhead every day, and he was always back in time for tea or something?
Oh, Frank Harrison. Frank Harrison was one of the best drivers we ever had. He was a gentleman. Everybody would tell you that. You could set your watch by him. His lorry was always immaculate. And Frank started at the crack of dawn. God knows how early he started, I don't know. In those days you always had a mate on the long distance lorries. You couldn't do it today. It wouldn't pay to have 2 men on one lorry, would it? But he always had a mate on a lorry. He was a young apprentice, if you like, who wanted to be a driver. And his mate had to be ready for Frank, because Frank would go at the crack of dawn. He was the first lorry backed up to Birkenhead Mill every morning of his working life. He was outside the gates before they opened, backed up to the mill ready for his backload. And he was right. There was no two ways about it. He was a clever bloke. Frank knew what he was doing. He was up there, and because he was the first lorry there, they always knew he'd be the first lorry. And his stuff was always ready. Frank will be here in the morning, so they put all his stuff out on the dock, ready for him, if you like. Now, the other blokes would get up an hour later than Frank, sort of thing. They'd come up there and there'd be a queue. There'd be 4 or 5 of them queuing up, waiting to get loaded, if you like. Frank was first man, his load was ready, he was halfway back before they got there, like that. And he'd stop and have his lunch somewhere on the way back, and you could set your watch by him. The farmers used to make me laugh. I used to go around Hickson on the road there, back from Stafford side, and of course that was on his route back from Birkenhead. And the farmers used to tell me you could set your watch by, there's Frank Harrison going, about 4:30, his lorry would be going past dead on time, so he'd be back in the yard, his lorry would be brushed down, he'd always brushed his lorry down every time, and he'd gone home for his tea, and all the other blokes weren't anywhere near back, you know. Frank was back, swept clean, and gone off like that, and you just left it to Frank. You didn't argue with him, but Frank used to, well, I think I told Sue, Father used to laugh in the office, he said, for God's sake, don't give Frank a load anywhere near Sandbach. He said, because if Frank gets anywhere near Sandbach, he'll turn into the works to have something done with his lorry. You left, he was that sort of bloke. I mean, if there was a squeak or a rattle on his lorry, he'd turn into the Foden works to get it put put right. And of course he paid for it out of his pocket, and he'd come back in the mill and tell father what it had cost, and you'd reimburse him like that, you know. But he thought the world of Frank. There was no better driver. And if you saw his lorry being loaded, 2¼ hundredweight bags of wheat in thick Hessian bags, and you could have put a ruler down the side of it, I don't think a bag would have fallen off even if he hadn't roped it. It was that straight, you know, and there'd be one little hole at the back left for the last bag, and you go in there and just shift it off his shoulder, dropping it like a peg in a hole, you know, like that. He just left that bit there for the last bag, sort of thing.
Just perfect.
And then his lorry was always perfect. He'd done it for, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years. Lived to be about 90, Frank did. But his lorry, and came dressed with a collar and tie, and his clothes were always neat and tidy. His lorry was as spotless. Woe betide any mate that made a mess in Frank's lorry. Like that, he'd come in.
So the mill must have been quite an employer of people during.
Well, in those days, yes. It was one. I suppose as it succeeded, it's in local labour, mostly chaps who worked on farms. They were the best employers you got. They were used to it. Now, if you got a chap coming as a lorry driver from Burton-on-Trent or somewhere, he didn't last 12 minutes. I'm not doing this bloody job again. It was too much like hard work. They had to hump bags. You had 1¼ hundredweight beet pulp bags, which were awkward beggars. You had 2 hundredweight slag bags, little bags weighing 2 hundredweight. And you were black as granny's nutting bag. Handling them, you know, you were like a sweep when you'd finished handling those damn things. And you get to farms, and a lot depended. Most farmers are the salt of the earth. A great majority of them are very decent blokes, a lot of leg pull and all the rest of it, but on the whole, they were decent blokes. You get the odd bastard, but you do in any business, don't you?
Of course.
But you go to the farms, and as long as you looked as if you were going to do something, they'd come and help you. Because you draw in the yard and you unsheet your wagon if it's a wet day, and you'd start putting the stuff to the side of the lorry like that, and they'd come out of the farmhouse and give you a hand, sort of thing, and help you carry it off. Then you get the odd bastard. I always remember one bloke. I sold him 100 ton of fertiliser, and it was a big farm, and he sat in the house with his 2 sons like that, and he watched our blokes unload every bag. He never offered to help them for one bag. They got to jump on the lorry, put it to the side, get it on the back, take it, stack it up with several lorry loads, as you can imagine, for 100 ton, and he never offered one atom of help. And they came in the office blazing about it, and they needn't have done it according to union rules. It was illegal. You were only supposed to drive the lorry and put it to the side. But they don't send me there again, Mr. Orme, sort of thing. I wouldn't have done it. I'd have driven out the yard. But you get the other silly driver, if you like, who went in there all mouth like that. I'm not doing it. The union says I only drive the lorry and put it to the side. You know what the farmer would say. You know what you can do. You can get down that road as soon as you can, like that.
So would the mill have been? What were the working conditions like? Was it dangerous at any?
Well, any mill years ago was a dangerous place to work. There's many an explosion in a mill for a very simple reason. You were on a silicosis order because of dust, like that, and the old saying, a miller was always a fat bloke, wasn't he? He was always ingesting the dust, if you like. He was always a jolly miller. He was never a slim nimble bloke, but it wasn't that so much. If you ground corn with stones like that, you released nitrous oxide into the air, especially with oats. You were grinding like that, and there were no such thing as dust extractors or magnets in those days. And if you you enclosed it with walls and put it in an enclosed space, and you're busy grinding with these things, and it got full of dust in the air, and you hit a piece of metal, and you got a spark. Well, you've been a teacher, you know that a nitrous oxide bottle and a spark includes a bang, doesn't it? It was a sort of experiment you did in the school lab, wasn't it? Nitrous oxide plus it amused the children no end, and it entertained the science lab.
So did you ever have any accidents down at the mill?
No, things had got a bit better when we electrified the mill. We took out the stones and put electricity in, and then we put dust extractors in the feeds, if you like, to suck the dust out. You saw a mill working, there was always dust coming out the side, wasn't it? Like that. It was extracting the dust for obvious reasons, for you could breathe better, and it was less dangerous, if you like. But as Mellion Mill had an explosion and blown the machinery through the floors and killed people years ago because of the danger of nitrous oxide and metal. You got a nail or a piece of metal off a farm in the grain, and you were grinding, and there was a spark, and you got a bang like that, and it would be a very dangerous place.
So when your father took over the mill, was it still water powered then? And how did that work?
Well, you diverted the Trent under the mill into the mill stream, if you like, and the mill, you had turbine working, if you like, to do the grinding. You've got power from a watermill, just like any other watermill, if you like. It's one of the watermills on the Trent, and of course, previous to that, it had. I don't know how long Lord Lichfield's family owned it. I don't know. You'd have to go back to see the records on that. I don't know who had it before that, like that. But because you see, there was King's Bromley, wasn't there, and things like that. I don't know who owned it before Lord Lichfield. I couldn't tell you. But he owned it as long as I can remember, and it had a various history. It had been a flour mill and a grain provender mill. One of the buildings there had been a wire drawing mill. One of the smaller building there had been a wire drawing mill, and then of course it had been a tape mill. You know, the Industrial Revolution, that cotton mills and tape mills and things like that. And that big house, is it Elm House or something, on the corner next to McGregor's?
Where are we talking about?
Down the mill end. Next to McGregor's, next to
Oh,
Hellaby,
right, I know, yeah.
next to
I know
Hellaby
which one
Cottage, that great big.
Yes, the big tall one.
Well, that was built for the workers at the mill. They used to live, the workers at the mill, when it was a tape mill. And at Gaskell's Bridge there was a wharf there that belonged to the mill. And they used to send stuff up the canal during the industrial for delivering to the ports, if you like. And there was a wharf there, and but the mill burnt down, and it was, I don't know whether Lord Lichfield rebuilt it or what, but somebody rebuilt it anyway. It burnt down, and it became a tape mill. And that mill is still in existence. That business is still in existence at Mayfield, at Ashbourne. If you go to Lower Mayfield, there's a tape mill there.
I know Mayfield, yeah.
Yeah, if you go to Lower Mayfield, there's a tape mill there at the bottom, isn't there? Well, that originated in Orme. When it burnt down the second time in the village here, they didn't set up again in Orme. They transferred the business to Ashbourne to Mayfield, and for years I remember there was a brass plate on the door at Mayfield that said Orme's Mill.
Oh, really?
And occasionally you get correspondence from mixed up, you know, in the post and things like that. But that mill is still operative, I believe.
That's fascinating.
I believe it's still going. I haven't been to look lately, but
Yeah.
well, certainly if it's gone out of business, it's lately, you know.
Just changing the subject rapidly now. Can you tell me about the Orme Cup?
Only that Father was quite involved with the village, if you like, in those days. It was a smaller place. There was Leavesleys, if you like, and Bannisters, and my father. There was kids down the village who was a surveyor. There was Duroses at the mill house, things like that. And they all had something to do with the village, if you like. And Father gave a cup to the village for cricket, if you like, and it became the Orme Cup, which still goes today, doesn't it? Well, I can't tell you when it started. You'd have to look in the parish records for that.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what year whether it was after the war or whether it was during the war or before the war. I can't just tell you. I don't remember, to be honest, because I wasn't here a lot of the time. I went to a public school and then a prep school before that, and then I went into the army and got thrown out of that. They didn't like me, and I only did 119 days, which I was chucked out because I got a dicky leg. And
Just going back to the school, you said something to Sue about you being taught here.
yes, this was a village school. Can I just?
Yeah, I was going to
Can
say that you were educated here, weren't you, about this?
Oh, the schoolroom.
Yeah.
When I was very young, there was a lady in the village called Miss Hunter, who was a farmer's daughter, and she wanted to start a school. And she started it in this room. It was a little private school with one teacher called Miss Hunter, and she's quite a character. And there were the Duros children, there were 2 children there. There were the kids in the village, there were 2 of the kids' family. There were the Myrtles, there were 2 there. There was a girl and boy. There was the kids, the Myrtles, the Duroses. Who else was there? Anyway, there was only a few pupils, if you like, and she started a little village school in this room. There was a piano, and I couldn't play truant, it was no use at all. And she started a school here, and then she obviously did a little bit better, and it got bigger, and got more children, and she then transferred, because this wasn't big enough, she transferred, I think it's where Shaking Stevens lives. They all call him that, don't they?
Shake Seagull. Yeah.
But Seagull lives down by Salter's Bridge there, and she moved to a slightly bigger school there, and then it got bigger still, and she went to Winster, Burton, just the other side of Burton, and she got quite a big school there eventually, and she lived to be about 90 something. She was quite a character, and she, but I say, it originated here. It was a schoolroom when I was a child anyway, like that, and then it moved down there. And then
So you didn't have far to go to school then when you were very, very little?
No, it was a bit too close. Yeah. But things in the village were much quieter, weren't they? I mean, I remember driving, my father every year used to go to Tenbury Wells and buy some cattle, some store cattle, to put on the mill meadows. And I used to go with him to the market there to buy them, and we'd drive them from the station, drive them from the market to the station, and load them up, and they come into Orme station, and then it was better than the rodeo, really. As kids, we used to ride bicycles in front of them, shutting the gates of people's gates down the village street to stop the cattle going in the gardens and so forth. And father would end up at the back with somebody, and us kids would go at the front. We enjoyed it. It was lovely, you know. And we'd drive them from the station at Orme through the village down to the Mill Meadows, across Statfold Bridge, like that, onto the Mill Meadows down there. And he always had to, and often he'd buy more than he needed. I know to get the lot you wanted, you probably only wanted 20 and you ended up buying 30 or something because it was a job lot. And then you'd find somebody to buy the ones you didn't want. I always remember father got somebody in the Uttoxeter market. He said it taught him the best lesson he'd ever had. He told this bloke to take his pick, like that. He said when he'd taken his pick, he said the others looked bad. He wasn't. He said I never did it again. He said you couldn't quarrel with them. He told them to do it. He said, but they obviously picked the best. He said, when he'd taken those, the others didn't look so good. But we used to drive the cattle through the village. Well, you couldn't do that today, could you? Impossible.
Absolutely.
And I remember the basket people coming, Mansell family cutting the willows, making the baskets and coming and selling them at the door. Mother would buy a trug for flowers or something like that in the garden, but they'd hawk them around the village. Butcher's baskets, baker's baskets, things. I remember that. I remember the potman coming each year. He used to come and sell, you know, there's blue and white pottery for the kitchen pottery. He was an artist. He'd come and demonstrate plates to you like that, or, you know, like that. I'm not selling. We liked seeing him, actually. Mother always bought something off him, you know, like that every year. He'd come once a year. Then the people from Cyprus would come every year selling crochet tablecloths and dinner mats and things. I've still got them like that. You ordered it one year and they delivered it the next year. And each village in Cyprus had its own pattern, and it was done by young girls who lovely eyesight. They're beautiful when you look at them, the tablecloths and the things. And
have you got any handy?
Yes.
So I could just get a quick bit of film of them before I go.
Yes.
Because I remember you telling me about them before.
Yeah, they were beautiful. And you chose your pattern. You chose your pattern when he came, and then he brought them the following year, and you paid for them. But he loved his work. It was a shame when the war came, it all finished, of course. But he showed you everything, if you like. He was so proud of what they'd done that even if you didn't buy it, he'd show you the tablecloths and the things that even if you didn't buy them, you generally bought something off him. You only saw him once a year, but the work was beautiful. And of course that all finished. Then I remember the once a year they drive the New Forest ponies through the village. They used to come once a year. We used to love them coming, and hoping that somebody would buy one, you know, but they'd drive them through the village like that, and once a year. But all this finished with the war, didn't it? And but I'll show you the.
That'd be great.